What's up, gamers? My name is Athena, and welcome back to my series of tutorial videos on how to use the DiceCloud version 1 character sheet for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This is the third part in the series. We started the last part making a character sheet from scratch, and we are going to continue in this part with filling out the species information or racial information, depending on what your terminology you're using, for this character that we are making. So we are making it is a fairy warlock named Bubbles. And to start with the fairy, we're going to be using the Journal tab and the Features tab. There are two other things that we're going to use to accomplish this. We might use this DiceCloud version 1 helper. If not in this video, we will definitely be using it in the next video, but it has a bunch of variables and miscellaneous equations and formatting and stuff to help you set up your character sheet and basically automate it as much as possible. If we don't use it this video, we will use it for the next part. And then we are also going to be using 5e.tools, which is a website where I get all of my D&D information, including stuff on like monsters, monster tokens, all that good things. I use it because it's free. And it has pretty much every source, including stuff that is for the DM's Guild or third party. It's got the Humblewood campaign things, Tal'Dorei, Wildemount. So it's got all sorts of resources, and I find it to be really useful. And so we're going to be referencing this as we make this character. So this is where we are starting off. This is where we left off from our previous video. We filled out the persona tab with the background information. We did a little bit of stuff in inventory, and we also added our base ability scores. And now we are going to be editing our species information. At the end of the video, we'll do an overview of each tab to see what has changed. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to go into the Journal tab to start off. And in your Journal tab, if you opened up the character sheet and you had a race in mind, you put it in, it will be showing in your Journal tab right here. It'll say fairy or elf or dragonborn or whatever you put in. Maybe you key smashed, I don't know. We're going to click on that, and it's going to open up a box that we can edit using the pencil. When we edit it, we're going to see there's a text field with the name of the race. And we've got two buttons here. We've got Add Effect and Add Proficiency. We're going to be using both of them. And we are going to start by adding our effects and proficiencies for the fairy. So we're going to add our ability score improvements. We're going to add our speed. We're going to do something with the carrying capacity. I don't personally use it, but I like to put it in there because then if you're using the variant encumbrance rules, it doesn't pop them off as often. I don't use them, and this is an optional thing, but if your DM wants you to use it, it's a good thing to know how to do it. And then we're also going to put in our base languages, so the stuff, it is common, and then I think Sylvan a fairy gets by default. So we're going to add all that. The fairy race or species allows you to choose either 2 ability scores that you can add +2 to one of them and +1 to the other, or 3 ability scores that you're going to add +1 to each. I'm going to do +2 and +1 because I would really like the dexterity to be a bit of a higher number. If just as a reminder, let me click out of this. As a reminder, our base ability scores are already set. So if you look at our stats, we have an 8 strength, 9 dexterity, 14 constitution, 7 intelligence, 12 wisdom, and 13 charisma. The only three scores, I should say, that are going to benefit from any ability score improvement are strength, dexterity, intelligence. All the other ability scores are not going to benefit too much, but I actually want to put +2 into dexterity to give it just a little bit more of an edge, and I'll be putting that +1 in charisma for the same reason. So we go back to our journal, we click on the fairy, and we edit it. We're going to add an effect. It's going to open up this field here. By default, it says no stat +0. It's got a value field. And on the right side, we have base value, add, multiply, minimum, and maximum. And on the left side, we have a bunch of categories. So if I click on any of these categories, it's actually going to open a drop-down menu. We're going to start with the ability scores. Okay, so it's going to drop-down menu. It's going to, by default, it's going to select strength. That's okay. We can change it. So this first one is going to be a +2. And I wanted to add that to dexterity, so I'm going to make sure I click dexterity. And I'm going to make sure it's set to add. And in the value field, I'm going to put 2. Now, this little light bulb at the end of the value field is actually a little hint. If you hover over it, it says this is a formula field. This means anything that has that little light bulb, you can put a formula into it, and it will just automatically accept that and do that calculation and apply it to the relevant part of your sheet. There's no formulas involved in ability score improvements, so we probably won't have to worry about that until we get to the class stuff, but it's just a good thing to point out. Once you're done with that, you can either click the back arrow or click outside of the box to close it out. So that's our dexterity improvement. We're going to add a charisma improvement. So we're going to add effect. We're going to press that button again. We're going to go to ability scores. We're going to click charisma, scroll up to the value field, and put 1 in the value field. Okay, and then we're going to add a speed. So a fairy has a base speed of 30 feet and a flying speed equal to the walking speed. We're going to denote this somewhere else, but I would note that there is not really a good way to separate speeds in DiceCloud, unfortunately. It doesn't have separate values for flying, climbing, or swimming speeds, which is unfortunate, but there are ways around it, and I will show you what those ways are. I'll show you the ways. I will show you what those ways are. For right now, we're just going to put our base walking speed. That's going to be under add effect, and that one is going to be under stats. So by default, it's going to be set to hit points. It's got the same 5 values here. We're going to change the value on the right side from add to base value. So this is going to set the base version of our speed. Okay, and then we're going to click under stats, we're going to click speed, make sure that is set to that variable, that value. And in the value field, we're going to put 30 feet, or just 30. And we'll click out of that. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to add one more effect. Sorry, not the last thing, but we are going to add the last effect. We're going to add it again. We're going to open it up. It's going to, we're going to set it to base value. And we're going to click stats. And we're going to click carry capacity multiplier. This is going to multiply your carrying capacity times a certain number. So whatever you set this base value to. This is so that all of your equipment, because it tracks weight accordingly, all of your equipment doesn't like slow you down. In fact, before I mess with that, I'm going to trash can this real fast. In your inventory, you have this thing called weight carried. It's showing how much weight you're carrying. If you click on it, it does show you encumbrance rules if you care about any of that. So as it stands right now, we are encumbered by about 40 pounds. That's realistic and whatnot, but this is D&D, and you are going to acquire so much shit. Like, just so much of it. So if you don't want this thing to be any sort of glaringly alarming yellow or red bar down here, you're going to want to do this in your journal. So we'll click the fairy and we edit it. Let's add that effect back in. Go to stats, scroll all the way down to carry capacity multiplier, make sure it's set to base value, and the number that seems to work pretty well for any sheet is going to be based on your size. For a medium creature, I go 15. If it is a small creature, I'm going to half that, so you can put 7.5. A large creature is going to be doubled, and so that'll be 30. I got this number from someone, a friend. I don't know why that was the number that was picked. But it's the number that makes it so that your weight in your inventory doesn't slow you down. And even though I personally don't use carry capacity multiplier, I do like to add it just because I think numbers are interesting. So this is a small creature. It's going to be 7.5. But again, if you want an easy thing, medium is 15, large is 30. If you have a character that is larger or smaller than that, then you would half it again or multiply it again. It's completely up to you. This part is optional, technically. This is just my process for creating character sheets. So click out of it, and we're done with effects. We don't need to do anything else with this right here. The next thing we're going to do is a fairy has common and one other language. I'm just going to say Sylvan because that makes the most sense. So I'm going to add a proficiency. We're going to add 2 proficiencies. So I'm going to click this button twice. We're going to change the stat group from skill to language on both of them. And I'm going to put common, and I'm going to put Sylvan. And you'll type those into the field where it says name. Alright, and then so you'll click outside of that, and that will apply to your sheet. Now, I'm not going to show you what all that has changed just yet. We're just going to go over to the features tab, and we're going to start adding the features. Luckily, we only have 2. We have flight and we have fairy magic. And this is how I would set those up. So in here, we are going to use the button in the bottom right corner. It says add feature. You click on it. It's going to open up a box. This is what it looks like when you have a new feature. By default, it's going to be set to always enabled. But you can change it to enabled or disabled as you need. I find this to be useful for setting up characters like a Dragonborn, especially if you're using the Fizzbands Dragonborn, where you get the breath weapon by default, and then at 5th level you get an additional ability depending on which lineage you choose, whether you're chromatic, gem, or metallic Dragonborn. But you can use it however you need to. Maybe you have to de-level a character, but you don't want to delete out a feature that they got at a higher level. You can just change it to disabled, and if it has any effect on the character sheet, it will not affect the character sheet unless it is enabled. But by default, it's going to be always enabled, and I normally find no reason to change this. So we're going to start with the flight feature. We're going to name it, and I'm just going to put for the flight equals speed, or equals, I'm just going to put equal speed in parentheses. So that way you know, equals walk speed. That way you know your flying speed equals a walk speed. I'm going to go into 5e tools and I'm going to copy this text and I am going to paste it in here. Now, like I said, there's not really a good way to separate speeds out, but this is one way you can do it. You're going to add an effect and you're going to click stats and you're going to set it to speed and you're going to set it to minimum, and the value field, we actually are going to use this DiceCloud helper. The value field, you're going to find the stats in the DiceCloud helper. You've got variables and tools, stats and speed. This is the variable that is going to match this value to whatever the base value of your speed is. So if I put it here, you can see this number has changed from 0 to 30. That's because it is pulling from the base value of the speed that we set up in the journal tab. Okay? The reason why we're going to set it to minimum is because if your speed for swimming or flying or climbing is higher than your default walking speed, we don't necessarily want to apply that to show up in your stats. So this is the workaround that will allow you to see that you actually have a flying speed and what that flying speed is. It's not the most elegant, but it is the way that is going to work for us for now. So I'll click outside of that, and if I want to, I can click outside of this or click the checkbox and just be done with this box. If I do that, you're going to see we've got the banner and we've got the text. But if we did that with every feature in this screen, we would have a huge unreadable mess of different blocks and texts, and we wouldn't be able to find the things that we need to find. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to basically put this text under a read more or a cut. And how we're going to do that is we're going to click on the banner for this box. We're going to edit it. And in the description, we're going to press the enter space twice so that you've got a blank line and then 2 blank lines above it. In the very top blank line, you're going to put 3 dashes. Those 3 dashes create a cut. So everything above the 3 dashes is going to show up in the box. When you click out of it, it'll be readable text just from the Features tab. Everything below the dashes is going to be hidden away. So if I click away from this, you can see this is collapsed down into a small single text box that is not very intrusive and won't take up a lot of space. We're going to be doing a lot more of this kind of formatting, especially when it comes to class features, just because it's going to be easier to do it that way. But this is kind of the bare minimum for saving space in your character sheet, especially since Dungeons and Dragons can be a very text-heavy game. And the benefit to that is always that if you do it like that, you'll still have access to the text, And just real quick, I thought of one more thing I'm going to add to this description. I'm going to say no medium or heavy armor. So it made it just a little bit bigger, but I find that's negligible because it's something important to note about the fairy is that if you wear medium or heavy armor, you cannot fly. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do, or I should say the last thing we're going to do, is we're going to do this fairy magic. And we're going to format this a little bit more, mostly because it's kind of a big chunk and doesn't need to be this big. And kind of the goal is doing this so that you have all the things that you need, but you're not taking up so much space. So we're going to copy paste that whole thing. And we're going to go into our character sheet. We're going to go into features. We're going to make a new feature. We're going to call it Fairy Magic. And we're going to paste that into the character sheet. Now, my recommendation is to cut down on as much of the text as possible. So I'm going to italicize any spell names, and this is a lot of text here. So I'm going to actually cut that down. You know the Druidcraft cantrip? We're going to do a dash, and I'm going to make this bold, so I'm going to put 2 asterisks, and I'm going to put 3rd level, LVL for level, and I'm going to say Fairy Fire at 3rd level, Fairy Fire once per long rest, which you can put LR or you can type out long rest. And then it says you can cast either of these spells using spell slots. So I'm going to put W/O for without spell slot. And I'm going to capitalize that. You can also just write it out a little bit more succinctly if you don't, or not succinctly, but a little bit more expanded if shorthand is not your thing. So you can do once per long rest without spell slot. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the 5th level spell. The 5th level gives you enlarge, reduce, once per long rest without a spell slot. Oops. Okay. And intelligence, wisdom, or charisma is your ability, spellcasting ability. If you want to, you can definitely, take out whichever one that you're not using. Because this is a race that specifically allows you to choose which ability you use for this trait, you can match it up to whatever your spellcasting stat is if you have one. So in this case, a warlock spellcasting stat is charisma, so we're going to get rid of that intelligence and wisdom. We don't need that. I'm also going to just delete this out because it's already chosen. And then for all of this information, I'm going to keep all of this. Once you cast Fairy Fire or Enlarge Reduce, you can't cast that spell until you finish Long Rest. You can also cast either of these spells using spell slots you have at the appropriate level. I'm going to keep this. So I'm going to press enter. And I'm going to delete this because we don't need it. And then we've got 2 spaces here. We're going to make sure we have a 3rd one. And on that 3rd one, we're going to do 3 dashes. Alright, and that's going to cut down all of that text and so to something that's a little bit more quickly readable. Alright, and so the last thing we're going to do for the fairy is where we're going to go into spells. And this will be just a little bit of work that we're gonna pretty much do ahead of time for the Warlock. It's just going to be adding these 3 spells that we have. I put them in features because it is a feature, but we're also going to put it in spells because you're allowed to cast these with spell slots, and so it's easy to have them in there. So we're going to go into spells, and the spells tab is empty. Again, this will not change until we actually change it. But we're going to go into the bottom right corner and click the plus button. It's going to give us a menu, so it's going to give us a spell list, a spell from library, and a spell for custom spells. We're going to make a spell list. We're not going to touch any of the rest of this stuff, but we are going to name it Warlock Spells. And click the check mark or click outside of it. And so we have Druidcraft, Fairy Fire, and Enlarge Reduce. So what we're going to do next is we're going to click on that button again in the Spells tab. And we're going to click Spell from Library, and this should probably be your first thing that you do when setting up spells in a DiceCloud character sheet, is check the spell from library first. It has only spells from the player's handbook. It doesn't have all of them. It is missing a few key spells, but it has quite a few. So I recommend adding the ones that it has already before you add any custom ones. So we're going to look through and we're going to grab the spells that we can grab. So cantrips, it does not have Druidcraft by default. They are all in alphabetical order, so if Druidcraft is here, we'd see it. So we're going to skip on. We're going to look for level 1 spells, Fairy Fire. So you're going to click that, it's going to give a check mark. And then level 2 spells, we're going to look for Enlarge Reduce. And all the spells that you click the check mark for, it's going to save that. So like even if you collapse this, even if I collapse this category down just to make it more readable, Fairy Fire is still going to be selected. So once you've selected all the spells we want to grab, we're going to click OK. It's going to add them to the sheet. Now, this is important because these spells are not going to count against the number of Warlock spells you know, and they're also not going to count against, they're also going to be something that we can cast once per day each without a spell slot. So we're going to go into the Fairy Fire, for example. If you click on it, it's going to show you all of the text, casting time, range, components, and duration, including if it includes concentration and if it's prepared. And we're going to edit it. It's going to open up this box, and you can see there's all this information in here. We're not going to edit anything down here. We're just going to edit the name and this section here that says prepared. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set it to always prepared, so that way it is not going to be counted in any sort of way or capacity towards the amount of spells we know. So when we look at preparing spells, and I'll click into the other thing to show you, it is going to be grayed out. It's not going to be like selectable or editable or preparable, I should say, from the spell selecting menu, and that is a good thing because this spell is just sort of default for a fairy, and you don't want it to count against the limited number of spells that you can cast as a warlock. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to edit this name. I'm going to put in parentheses, and I am going to use shorthand for this, 1/LR for long rest, W/O without, spell slot. I'll click outside of that, and that way you look at your spells, you know at a glance, oh, okay, I have Fairy Fire. I can cast that once per long rest without using a spell slot. I find this is very useful for my players. It's definitely useful for me as a player as well. So this is just kind of the best way to do it. Let me show you real quick what I mean with the preparing. So on this banner, on the right side, there is this little bookmark. If you hover over it, it says change prepared spells. If you click on it, it's going to show you all of the spells that might be in this container, even if they aren't prepared. So we can see that this Fairy Fire spell, we've set it to always prepared. It is grayed out. If I click it, it just does that. It just opens up the spell. It won't let me do anything to it. The Enlarge Reduce currently is prepared, and so this box is red. So if I click it, I can do lots of things with that. And this means that it is counting it against the number of spells you can prepare. We don't want it to do that for the same reason that I explained earlier. So we're going to click on this and edit it. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did with the Fairy Fire. So we're going to set it from prepared to always prepared. And we're going to add in that shorthand to let us know that it's once per long rest without a spell slot you can cast this. Alright, so we click done. You can click that check mark at the top right of the Warlock Spells tab whenever you're done, and that will take away the boxes. It will also make any spell that you can't access invisible, so that it will take that away. And what we're left with is just the spells you know or have prepared or are always prepared for you. And then since Druidcraft was not in the Ida spell from library, we're going to add it in. So I'm going to go to 5e Tools, and I'm going to pull open Druidcraft. And I'm using the 2014 rules. If you're using the 2024 rules, it works the exact same way. Personally, I don't find the 2024 rules to be all that different from 2014, so I don't particularly care to use 2024 just yet. Nor do I particularly care to shell out another $50 for a player's handbook that is structurally not all that different from the player's handbook I already own. So in spells, we're going to use that button again. And this time we're going to click the very top option, which just says spell. It's going to open up this empty spell. Nothing in here has been added. And that is okay because we're going to fill it out. And we're going to do probably a lot more of this when it comes to doing the class. So by default, it is set to level 1. We want to make sure that it's categorized as a cantrip, so we're going to fix that. We're going to put the name of the spell. And this is a transmutation cantrip, so we're going to change that school to transmutation. It is also a cantrip, which means that it never is counted against the amount of spells you know or can prepare. So we're going to make sure it's set to always prepared. And then we're just going to copy and paste all of the information needed to cast it. So it's a casting time of an action, it's a range of 30 feet, duration instantaneous, and it is a verbal and somatic component. So range, we're going to put 30 feet. We're going to click verbal and somatic. By default, it is set to instantaneous for the duration. So the only thing left for us to do is to copy and paste the text for the spell and paste it into the description and just fix the formatting a little bit. So we want this to be some bullet points so that it looks nice and is readable. And click outside the box when you're done. And when you click on it to actually look at it, the text will be, of course, nice and readable. The text in the enlarge reduce is not necessarily all that nice, but if you want, you can always go in and format it and bold or italicize things that you might need to help you remember what the spell does. Anything that adds readability, I highly recommend that you add onto. So in this case, I'm just going to bold enlarge and bold reduce to denote those sections, just for readability's sake, but you can format it however you would like. So click out of those. And that is it for the fairy side of things. Let's go over the sheet and see what has changed. So we'll start with the stats page. As you can see, we now have a 17 in charisma and a 11 in dexterity. Those modifiers, well, the dexterity modifier, I should say, has updated, so that is actually changed in every other part of the sheet that requires it. So initiative, saving throws, and of course your skills, as well as your armor class. And if we click on dexterity, we can see base 9, fairy +2, total 11. And that's why I have the base ability scores and the racial ability score improvements in separate spots. It's just easier to track that way. If we click on the speed, we can see we've got a base 30 speed, and then we've got a flying speed, and that is 30 feet. So that's always going to match this number. If your speed increases from any benefit ever, this number is going to change as well. So we've set that up to sort of be self-maintaining. We click out of that. Features tab, we've got the fairy magic and flight features already in there with those text, nice and readable. Inventory has not changed, but this is what it looks like. Spells has changed, and this is what it looks like so far. We've got our 3 spells that are given to us just from being a fairy that we always have access to no matter what, except for the level 1, level 2, once per long rest for each of them, but you can also cast them with spell slots if you have them. And then the persona tab is the last spot we're going to look at, because as you can see, we now have languages in this box right here. We have common and we have Sylvan. If we click on either of those, we can see where those numbers are coming from. Also, back to inventory, if we click on weight carried, you can see that we can carry so much more things now. These numbers have changed. Is it realistic for someone with a strength of 8 to be able to carry 300 pounds of items? Probably not, but this is D&D, so the fantasy is what you make it. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this series has been helpful to you. Again, my name is Athena. I post videos on YouTube sometimes, I stream on Twitch sometimes, but mostly I am a professional dungeon master with Start Playing Games. My username on all 3 of those is AthenaXVio, so you can find me there. And I will see you in the next video, the final part, for putting together the class aspects of the character. I may split it into actually 2 parts, so there may be a part 5 instead of just 4, where I do the base class abilities and the subclass abilities separately. We shall see, but either way, stay tuned for the next part, and I have nothing else to say. Bye!